we really launched here in Chicago on our open data adventure really shortly after Mayor Emanuel was elected back in February, even though he didn't take office until May. So I thought what I would do was take a timeline approach and fill in the story of how we got to this point in time, nearly 2 years into, whoa, I don't know if you guys can see that, I just got a weird little warning. Fill in for you guys sort of how we got to this point in time, which is nearly 2 years into our open data and big data management program, and highlight really quickly at the end some of the things that are next up for us in the next 2 to 3 years, so you'll know a little bit about where we're going. Since we haven't really been formally introduced, I'm Brenna Berman. I'm the Deputy Commissioner here at the Department of Innovation and Technology, and we're the official home of the City of Chicago's Data and Analytics Management Program. And so everything that we'll be talking about today is really housed here. So basically we'll be going a bit through this timeline, and really it started off with Chicago naming the country's first municipal chief data officer. That's a great picture of our fearless leader, Brett Goldstein. I think I heard on the phone that a member, whoa. We're going to be right with a technical problem. Have a member of your police department. Brett actually came to the mayor's office when Mayor Emanuel was elected back in 2011 from the Chicago PD. He actually had been a homicide detective for quite some time, and then actually took over and founded the crime analytics program for the police department. And prior to that, he's had an odd background himself. He actually was the founder of OpenTable. So for those of you who make the occasional dinner reservation using the OpenTable application, you're familiar with his work. So he was named the Chief Data Officer in May of 2011, and Mayor Emanuel charged him with really creating the foundation for the open data program and the mayor's commitment to data transparency. And really that started off with the mayor's sort of mandate for releasing the data. And we started right away. When the mayor took office on May 16th, basically his charge to Brett was get as much data out as fast as you can. And that has included, for those of you who might have visited our portal, and I'll talk about the portal in more detail in a second, how it's structured and what's out there. But as of today, over the last 2 years or so, we've released nearly 1,000 data sets, and they range from everything like employer salaries to different types of 311 calls, 311 performance, from removing graffiti to filling potholes, to the city's awarded contracts, payments that we make to vendors, et cetera. So nearly 1,000 data sets in all. And I think it's pretty interesting to actually talk a little bit about how that data portal is structured. So what you're seeing here is actually a screenshot of data.cityofchicago.org, which is the City of Chicago data portal. And really we structured our data portal with a view toward usability and sustainability. So our data portal leverages the Socrata software, which you may or may not be familiar with. There's a couple of alternatives in the marketplace, but really we chose Socrata as our software partner for this for a couple of reasons. One, we wanted to focus on the usability of our data, right? It's one thing to sort of push data out to the public. It's another to make sure that the data is usable to different members of the public. And so we wanted to focus on our residents having access to the data to help them understand government. We wanted to focus on, frankly, the data being accessible to the press to give them greater transparency into government operations. And we wanted to make the data available to developers. And we'll talk about how we did that in a second. So one of the things that you'll notice sort of over here to the left side of the data portal is the different views that we provide. So obviously there's access to the straight data set, kind of Excel list style. but you also have access to different filtered views, et cetera, but there's also, for more of the layperson type resident user, charts, maps, calendars, forms. Oh, it's different. God, I went and looked at it live today, and of course it's different. I'll talk in a minute about how it's different. But there are lots of user-friendly views for the resident who can go and access a view of, let's say, service requests in their neighborhood on a map as opposed to just a list, which makes it a little more user-friendly. One of the views that I want to talk about is the list of APIs, which actually has apparently been updated since I took this screenshot about a week ago. One of the things that is important to the success of our open data program has been the relationship with civic developers in the Chicago and, frankly, the national community. We want our data to be used by people, right? We don't want to just put it out there and have it ignored. So we're actually conscious of developing APIs related to as much of our data as possible. And in fact, we have a new API going live in 2 weeks, which is the Community Policing API, which pulls together our community policing data, crime statistics, et cetera, all into one API, with the hope that through hackathons, et cetera, developers will pick this up and create apps that are valuable to our residents. We have several apps already available related to our 311 data, such as See, Click, Fix, et cetera, all of which make the data more accessible and usable. So for us, the usability of the data was just as important as the transparency aspect of it. The third thing I mentioned was sustainability. One of the things that's important here, more than just sort of the data, is that most of these data sets, and I'll say most because it's not 100%, but close to, say, 95% of these data sets are updated automatically. Either the interval sort of depends on the type of data. Some of them are updated at nightly intervals. Some of them are updated quarterly, depending on the data set. Some of them are updated in 15-minute increments, depending on what they are. And all of those are done through automated ETLs. We didn't want to get into the sort of bind of the data aging, which is what happens when it requires a manual update, because frankly, data becomes a detriment when it requires manual update, and whoever was responsible for it goes on vacation, retires, or otherwise forgets to update the data, and you're left with old data on your data portal that then gets picked up by some reporter trying to answer a question, and they have old data trying to answer a new question. So it was critical to us that we create a sustainable web portal that is automatically updated as the data refreshes. So as we launched and built out our data portal, that was complemented in December of 2012 by the mayor's executive order around open data. And this came from our desire to really create an evergreen and operationalized approach around open data. So, we create the data portal, and this was really driven by the chief data officer who was sitting in the mayor's office, was part of the policy group. And that's all well and good, but we all know that elections change things, priorities change things, and we wanted to make sure that the commitment to transparency and open data was going to continue beyond any single election or any single chief data officer. So the mayor issued an executive order in December that essentially laid out two very critical things. One, it established an open data council and open data coordinators in each of the city's agencies. We have nearly 30 agencies or departments, give or take where we are in the consolidation process. And we wanted to make sure that each of those agencies was responsible for the identification and publishing of all appropriate data to the data portal. So this essentially operationalized the identification and publishing of open data. Now, the actual publishing and definition of the ETLs to update the data happens through this department, but the responsibility for identifying the data and making sure that it is accurate resides with the operational departments, so the responsibility lives there. And because it is mandated through an executive order, that actually ensures that the commitment to open data and transparency will live beyond this mayor and this chief data officer and will become part of the fabric of each of the operational departments. So from the naming of a chief data officer back in May of 2011 all the way through to December 15th, 2012 and the issuing of the executive order really established our open data program and really created the foundation for our entire data analytics big data program here in Chicago. And we went from sort of the one-off approach of publishing data to operationalizing open data and transparency within each individual department, which kind of sets you up for the next question, which is, well, what do you do with all that data? How do you make it useful? And sometimes you're sort of forced to answer that question by outside forces. And for us, that outside force was the arrival of the NATO summit in 2012. And so what did that mean for us? And I would imagine that some of you saw what was going on with NATO on the news. So we had a couple of dignitaries and a couple protesters showing up for a couple of days. And hosting that summit required the coordination of multiple city agencies as well as external state and federal and nonprofit organizations over multiple locations across the city. And these agencies needed, frankly, deep situational awareness based on multiple types of data that existed across disparate systems that were not connected, and frankly, some of those systems weren't even city systems. And these agencies needed to be able to visualize that data to make quick, real-time decisions as the data was changing. So basically, we had departments that had spotty history coordinating with each other. We had external departments that were now attempting to coordinate with city agencies, and they needed data that didn't talk to each other, that were in systems that didn't talk to each other. And we needed all of this coordinated in a visual system across several locations in the city. Needless to say, we didn't really have a tool or a system that would help us do this. Nothing existed in the marketplace that we could find, and we had to do this in a very short timeline. So we had a bit of a challenge on our hands, and basically, to meet that challenge, we built something. And what we built was called Windy Grid. And this really was the first thing, and I'll describe what it was in a minute, that we built on the foundation of all of our city data that really pulled together and crossed all of those siloed boundaries that had existed in the city of Chicago for so long.